Hello, guys, and welcome to my strengths and weaknesses of every wildcard weekend team video. I know it's kind of a late upload, but some of these teams, I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of like, what is their true weakness? Because we have a lot of good teams in the playoff this year. And without further ado, let's get started. Starting off with my Packers, I am going to be going from the seventh seeds all the way up to the second seeds in this video, and I'm going to try to go over my general take on each individual team. So my Green Bay Packers, obviously the weakness, inexperience. We've heard it so many times before. They got only younger with the removal of Bakhtiari and Aaron Jones this offseason, and essentially are the youngest team in the league. I think that the inexperience can definitely show. We don't really have on the defense, we don't really have too many guys with strong playoff experience besides like Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, I guess you can kind of say. But overall, the defense is full of a lot of unknowns. I think that this is still a very good football team, obviously, but the inexperience on the defensive side of the ball as well as the offensive side of the ball. As we know, quite a lot of young wide receivers, young tight ends. Jacobs being kind of the veteran weapon on that offense, and then Jordan Love also needing to be a leader in the defensive here. But the second problem I would see with this team is it's a very average pass rush. There were some games where they had a boatload of sacks, but they were usually against worse teams. I wouldn't say that the pass rush has dominated anybody that has an elite tier O-line, which is one of the concerns going into Philadelphia on the weekend. I think that it's not like they're completely non-existent pressure, but it's not like they produce the amount of sacks that you want in game-changing moments. And then 3, bad turnovers. What I mean by this, because all turnovers are bad, but what I mean by this is that a couple of the things that I think have really derailed the end of the season for the Packers, were when they were driving against the Vikings, the Josh Jacobs fumble literally sucked the life out of the offense, and they couldn't recover from it until later in the game when they were scrambling to try and catch up with the Vikings. And then you look at even the Bears, Jalen Johnson stripping the ball from Jaden Reed. It had been a drive that had good promise. They were moving the ball, getting good yards at the beginning of the game again. So the thing about it is going into Philadelphia, that's got to be on their radar. I'm sure it already is. It's going to be one of those things that it's like, is that going to be kind of the same story where it derails their offseason early? I think this team can fix it because it's not like one guy just has turnover issues that is a star on the team. It's been a couple of different guys that have had this happen, and it ultimately kills momentum. Now, looking for the strength of the team, I would say the strong defense. The defense is honestly kind of the reason why this team, I think, won a good amount of games overall at every level. D-line, you've got Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, TJ Sladen, and then Lucas Van Ness, Kingsley Enagbare have even done a good job of kind of rusher and run defense by committee. The linebacker core, to me, a lot of people like to point out the secondary, but the linebacker core has been somewhat shaky in the sense that Edgerrin Cooper had been injured for weeks, but when he's played, he's been a difference maker. And Quay Walker was playing very well before his ankle injury weeks ago, and he's, they think that he's going to play Sunday, but he's also been very good. The leading tackler, good in coverage, good against run defense. And, even whoever the third has been, whether it's been Isaiah McDuffie or Eric Wilson, I think Eric Wilson has been kind of a breath of fresh air, actually, in terms of like run defense and sound tackling. And then, of course, in the secondary, you have Keyshawn Nixon, who has really kind of started to do better in this Jeff Hafley defense. And then obviously Xavier McKinney, not as many turnovers lately, but they don't really have anybody throw the ball deep on them. A lot of teams got to try and beat them with the run, beat them with these short yardage passing situations. And the team has just been tackling better. So the defense to me has been a major strength of this team. Not much, we're not used to seeing as much with the Packers. Usually the offense kind of kicks into gear, and is able to kind of carry this team, but not this year. The defense has been the strength of this team. The solid run game. Josh Jacobs, obviously, as everyone knows, I think he was 5th on all-time rushing yards, this season, with a resurgence with the Packers. And, but then the other thing that I also like to think is that Chris Brooks and Emmanuel Wilson, the second and third string running backs, they both had, I believe, over 500 rushing yards apiece as well. So it's quite a dominant, pass rush attack. And Chris Brooks was brought in, I believe, he wasn't on the team at the beginning of the season. So for him to come in and produce and do well, I think this run game is very, I wouldn't say underrated, but I don't think everyone knows about everyone on the Packers. And then 3, a well-rounded roster. Like I said, QB is a position of strength, of course, with even if Jordan Love goes down, Malik Willis has clearly been able to come in, play well. The O-line, very, very good. Running backs, wide receivers, a good amount of depth, even with the injury to Watson. I still think that they have 5 guys that can literally go out there and do well, tight end, and just overall a well-rounded roster with no glaring weaknesses. I think people like to say that the cornerback room is kind of a glaring weakness, but in all honesty, Carrington Valentine and Eric Stokes have really kind of stepped up in the absence of Jair, and it hasn't been like they're just getting gouged all the time. So we'll see what they can do come Sunday against the Eagles. Moving on, we have the other 7th seed, the Denver Broncos, as we all know, got in off of a win that, in my opinion, still Kansas City handed to them. But you look at Denver and their weaknesses. The thing to me is that they have a lack of weapons. You've obviously got Courtland Sutton, who is a very, very good wide receiver, borderline elite to me. And, but they have a lack of weapons. Mims has kind of come in and he started to do some really nice things. I think that goodness, and I can't even remember their head coach's name right now, but I think that he's done a very good job of getting him incorporated and progressing this offense towards what he wants it to be. Rookie QB. We all know Bo Nix did very, very well this season, but I mean, there were definitely times to me against elite teams that he kind of was, I wouldn't say suspect, but he was indecisive a little bit. He's got to believe a little bit more in himself. I think that'll just come with time, but it's always tough when a rookie QB goes into the playoffs, and especially since they're going to be playing the Bills. The strengths of this team are that they're well coached. Sean Payton, like I was, completely forgot his name before, is a very good coach. He's done very, very well for this team. The defense has clearly, kind of really, really recovered, since last year when they were just getting murdered last year. And it's like, don't get me wrong, just about everything with the Broncos went wrong last year, but they're very well coached, and it's not like Sean Payton hasn't went and won a Super Bowl before, even though it's been a while since he's been in the playoffs. Elite defense. Their defense doesn't do much wrong. They have a good passing attack. They have, they have guys that, are good for tackling, good against the run defense. And then, of course, also the secondary led by Patrick Surtain, who could very likely, is in the contention for Defensive Player of the Year. And like I said, and then strong offensive pieces. I know that they had, I said, a lack of weapons, but Courtland Sutton, to me, I'd like to kind of talk about him a little bit here, and I'd like to say that he's he did very, very well. He was a very, very strong security blanket. And if you even look at like the amount of conversion percentage that he had on third down for catches, it was one of the highest in the league. And Mims to me is one of those players that he's a touchdown waiting to happen. The more opportunities you get him, but they do have strong offensive pieces, and I don't think that they are without talent to be able to make some buzz in their game. Moving on to the Washington Commanders. The Commanders, their weaknesses to me is their run game. They just don't have a typical run game, and I've just seen so much so regularly where they just don't run it with as much confidence as you would think. I think that Robinson is good, but they just don't seem to really have that mojo, to have a solid run game to me. Their run defense is also kind of porous, I think, about, obviously when they played the Eagles, this was one of their biggest issues. But there was so many times when Saquon was just a free runner. And don't get me wrong, we saw a year where it was nuts and crazy how many times Saquon alone burst out a big run, and he was untouched or barely touched, and he hardly had to do anything. And then I said, young QB. Now, much with Bo Nix, this will be Jaden Daniels' first, game starting in the playoffs. And, sometimes that pressure gets to him. And it's not like their offense has been flying so high that he's going to come back down to earth, but they've been inconsistent, even with him at the helm. I think that he's going to do pretty well, but you just never know, in this league. Strengths, versatile QB. The reason I bring this up is because he has the mold to be able to just be such a problem. He's not quite like Lamar Jackson, of course. It's hard to be that elusive and that quick, but he can gouge you, and it just comes out of nowhere sometimes. I've seen negative plays from them or even penalties that put him back, and then he's running down the field, for like a 15-yard gain, making it a potential fourth and manageable, or like or close enough to where they're like, well, it's not just automatically a punt here. Scary Terry. I just wanted to highlight him because he is one of the better guys. Obviously not a lot of playoff experience being on the Commanders his whole career, but he's very, very good. And I don't think this kind of guy is the one where the moment's going to get to him. Veteran pieces. The veteran pieces that I think about, kind of go back to Scary Terry a little bit, but then it also makes me think of Zach Ertz. He's a man who's been on playoff teams in the past and that sort of thing. And then, you look at some other guys on the defense. It's good that they traded for Marshawn Lattimore. He brings a good voice to that, and he's been on, good defenses on the Saints before coming here. But overall, I think they have the veteran pieces that are going to be able to calm this team and to get them to play their best. And I think that that's important for any team that is young. Moving on, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. The weaknesses of them, to me, is the fact that we don't even know who their QB is going to be. Is it going to be Russ, who in the last 4 games, which have all been losses, he didn't even have 700 yards, you guys, after so many people were like, oh, his career was resurrected, is Russ reborn, all of this, crap. And I make it well known that I'm not a fan of Russell Wilson. I think that he is a very overrated quarterback that has always been bolstered up by his good defense, and now it catches up with him when he's older. Now that he's older, because he can't do the things he used to when he was young that he relied on. The offense, they just are very underperforming. To me, with the weapons that they have, perhaps it's Arthur Smith's offensive scheme. They can put up points, they can put up yards, they can do good things, and they have good weapons, but they just they just don't perform to the level that I think that they're capable of with the well-rounded weapon core that they have. from running back all the way to wide receiver. They have two good tight ends, Freiermuth and Washington. And then it's like the wide receiver core to me it has everything you need. It has Calvin Austin, who is kind of your short guy that can, do things from the slot, can burn guys deep. George Pickens, who's obviously a loudmouth, but it is undeniable what his contested catch capability is and his ball tracking skills. And it's just, to me, they're just underperforming. And I put morale as another weakness. It might be a little bit of a reach because this is a well-coached team, and come playoff time, it might just all get brushed under the rug. But they do actually have a morale problem. The talk of the QB carousel, the talk of, if everyone just did their job, kind of noise around Christmas, and just, they actually do have issues. Now, I wanted people to, looking around, about these teams going into the playoffs, many people were saying that, the Packers are stumbling into the playoffs. And it's like, yeah, granted, it's 2 losses, but it's not like they lost how the Steelers lost, where the overall team is just in disarray. So it's like, I do actually think it's an issue for the Steelers, and they really gotta like put their demons aside and play, or they're likely a first round exit. Their strengths, above average weapons, like I was saying before. I think Pickens is above average, despite many people not like him. I don't like him for his boisterous attitude and, how vocal he is, rather than being kind of a gritty, just, show up on the field, type of thing. Najee Harris is clearly, above average running back and capable of a lot. He can even for a bigger guy, he can catch well. And then Jaylen Warren as well, their second running back, who he could be a running back 1 on a lot of different teams. And then Freiermuth is obviously good. Darnell Washington, I think, is just, maybe they're taking their time with him, but I think he could be an unbelievable asset to them, given the chance, because he's so big and so large, and he just he looks like he could be an O-lineman with his size. But he's a tight end that has not crazy speed, but has size that, how in the world could defenses defend that? Obviously they have a great defense. I don't think I really need to go over that, TJ Watt, Hayward, I forget the other pass rusher on the other side, that's really good. And then you go back to the DBs, Joey Porter's good. You've got Minkah Fitzpatrick, you've got, quite a lot of guys, even Patrick Queen. And it's like, who even knows who the person was that they were referring to, type of thing, but they're so well coached. And that just leads me to my last point, is that they have a great head coach. I don't care what anybody says about how, so many of these Pittsburgh fans want to change the scenery. It's like, I get unrest, and that he hasn't really produced, at a crazy high elite level, but it's hard to have this level of sustained success. And to me, it's not like they don't have the pieces. But moving on to our next team, we have the Vikings, because obviously they didn't win the division, so they are a 5 seed. I put their strengths first just to kind of talk, because we already kind of know about this. The elite weapons, Jefferson, Addison. I'll even put Aaron Jones in there because he's still really good. Hawkinson. Even Naylor's come along. I wouldn't say he's elite, but he's a very good wide receiver that's done good things for them. The unpredictable defense, and I'm not saying that in the terms of that they're off and on. Their defense is so unpredictable that it gives other teams headaches, and that they've gotten a lot of points, off of turnovers and even pick sixes. I think of Van Ginkel, a guy we only know for rushing the passer, but this guy's had 2, I think, potential third that he dropped, this season, which is, you don't think about that except for from DBs. But it's like, their defense, goes without saying. They've done a very good job. And even last week, even when the offense couldn't do anything, they did their job against the Lions, who are a crazy good offense. And this defense is, to me, is for real. The turnover ratio, like I was saying about the defense, and not every team that has a good defense has the turnover ratio. Some teams are just good at getting off the field forcing punts and that sort of thing, but they have a good turnover ratio, because of that. And that's why this team is so good, because you give it to an offense with this talent, and it's just you can't stop them all day. The weakness, QB playoff experience. Darnold, obviously it's his first playoff game. He kind of just, I don't know what happened last week, but they could have definitely scored a lot more points, and it's not like, the Lions did play some miraculous defense. There were still some guys that were wide open that clearly people saw, and, Darnold needs to fix that, and quickly, because it's not like they're playing some, none of the teams I think in the playoffs are pushovers this year. Big plays against defense. Their defense is good, but I've seen some of these corners, get burned. I remember, the Packers and their games coming back. They were even picking on Stephon Gilmore, which it's like you never thought you would hear about this guy who was a consummate pro and just really, really good. And they've just, to me, they've had some plays when it's like, whether they're blitzing, if they don't get to the QB, they do give up big plays, and then the rushing attack. I don't know whether to say it's an actual like weakness, or whether they're just not committed to the run enough. I get it that you have these elite receiving weapons, but they just don't rush it a crazy amount, and I think it was one of their and I think many can agree that it was one of their problems last week, that they should have ran it with Jones, who was averaging like 5 yards a carry. And it's weird. O'Connell, I think, gets wrapped up in, the passing attack, which I get. It's a passing league, but especially this year, you look at rushing and it's like, it could be one of their downsides. They're not always going to be able to convert these just because they have these guys, if it's like 3rd and long or anything like that. But it's one of those things that in the playoffs, having a good ground game is very beneficial for closing games against teams that you don't know when they're going to get really hot. Moving on to the Chargers, we have the weaknesses here are young weapons. Obviously, Quentin Johnston, was drafted last year. Ladd McConkey, drafted this year, who doesn't look like he ever gets phased, and let's hope that continues in the actual playoffs, because, and that sort of thing. But younger weapons means that, the pressure can maybe get to him. And we wouldn't have thought of that about Zay Flowers last year, but then he ultimately, kind of sealed the fate of the Ravens when he had that fumble near the goal line. You try to do too much. You're trying to rise above the moment, and your fundamental can come unraveled in a single play that ultimately is really, really bad for your team. So let's hope that doesn't happen here. I think they are going to be a very well coached team. But the other thing too is that they're a low scoring offense. I know they like to run the ball. J.K. Dobbins is good. I like him, but with a QB like Herbert, and, several weapons that I think they are, doing pretty well. And Herbert's the guy you want for any sort of wide receiver. He's going to get it to them where only they can catch it. But they haven't really had a crazy scoring offense this year. And, we've seen it where it's like, oh yeah, they were up 10-0 against, the Chiefs in their their first meetup, and then they couldn't score. And if they had even scored, several field goals, they would have been a lot closer in that game or something. And it's like, this is really the only thing I can really knock on this team is their offense, even though it hasn't been a terrible offense. But moving on to the strengths of this team, they obviously have an elite QB. Herbert is an elite QB, can do so many good things. He can run effectively, and he's very, very accurate. He's one of the most accurate in the league, I believe. Their defense is elite this year. They have all the pieces they need: a solid pass rush, solid secondary, and, even a pretty good linebacker core. But, their defense has been playing very, very well against all levels of talent this year. And then, their third strength is that they have a great coach. Harbaugh has come into the league twice now and turned franchises around that were doom and gloom before they were. Now, maybe not the Chargers as much because they've had talent and Herbert's been, doing Herbert things, but he's really helped them put it all together and make this team a team that, has earned its spot in the playoffs. But moving on, we have the Rams. You guys, I put this black here because I didn't want, the yellow's way too bright, to be honest with you. Their weaknesses. They have an average defense. I don't mean that by any discrimination, but it's not like their defense is anything crazy flashy. They do have good young pieces, that are going to emerge and they're going to be cornerstones for years to come, but they just don't have the talent like they used to. Obviously, like everyone said, it's hard to replace Aaron Donald and the effect he has, but I do think it has made them a lot less reliant of a unit on him, to where they have to play more well-balanced football. Their offensive line, obviously the Rams' O-line is sketchy. You do have a guy like Stafford who can get it out quick on offense, and thank God for that he's going to be able to keep his cool. And, much to my dismay, he's not afraid to take a hit instead of throwing a pick, which can be a double-edged sword. But you look at their O-line, and while they haven't been bad, in the run game, they just don't instill that much faith. Sometimes they do give Stafford the time he needs, but a lot of what the Rams have ended up doing are short yardage stuff, and it's harder and harder to do that when you can't have anybody go downfield against defenses. Their offensive depth. I say this primarily because you look at when Puka, Nacua, and Cooper Kupp were out, they had Tutu Atwell as their star wide receiver. Now, there's nothing wrong with Tutu Atwell. I think he's flourished in this system in his own way, when he's given opportunities. But to me, it's just really bad. I'm pretty sure they did rest their starters last week because they just were worried about potential injuries and that they did want to be ready for playoff football, but then, looking at the strengths, they do have elite weapons where they have them. Kyron Williams is a good back, had a pretty good year. I think he could do better behind a better O-line. Like I said before, not let their run attack is terrible, but it can be average at times. And then, like I said, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are elite. Cooper, not to the level he was at when he won the Triple Crown. It's hard to maintain that kind of, level of play. But what better guy for Stafford to do it? And I think we'll see some magic from the Rams in Arizona because of the fires on Monday night against the Vikings. Their playoff experience is very good. They don't have a lot of the pieces, some of the pieces that they had, when they won the Super Bowl, but they do have good playoff experience, in key positions. So looking at them, I think this is a team that's going to be very, that is, I would say, somewhat underrated going into the postseason, and they're not to be trifled with. Moving on now, we have the Houston Texans. To me, their weakness is the O-line. Obviously, C.J. Stroud got sacked a lot this year, second only to Caleb Williams. And, they sometimes just haven't really produced. And it's kind of nuts to me to think that Laramie Tunsil, who's still a very good left tackle, but then the rest of the O-line is so inconsistent and so bad, that it puts C.J. Stroud on an island, and he hasn't responded the best to pressure when they blocked very, very well for him last year. Lack of weapons. They have Nico Collins, and he's very, very good. He's an elite wide receiver. But then you look at, you've got you've got, your star running back, and then, hardly anybody else. The injuries to Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs. Obviously, the addition of Diggs was to kind of shore up and give them more strength, but they both ended up getting season-ending injuries, which is very unfortunate. So now it's really the Stroud, Nico Collins, and why can't I remember their running back's name? Goodness show, where it's like the trio that has to carry this offense with no O-line, which is just, bad. But like I said, the run game is subpar sometimes. I think that, they do get good runs at times, but they just haven't played the best that, you could see. But strengths, they have an elite pass rush on defense. They have an elite wide receiver, like I said, in Nico Collins, and they are well coached. They've been in a number of tough games where they've closed out this year, so it's not like this is a team that just completely folds to their inadequacies. They play hard. Moving on, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Weaknesses to me is inconsistency. They've had games where the offense doesn't perform as well as you would think with the well-oiled machine that it is. Turnovers, sometimes you see Baker throw a couple of these. Sometimes I've seen a couple of wide receivers where it bounces off their hands, and it turns over. The one game I think that was, that you look back and see this most prevalent was actually against the Saints, where, Baker, I think, had like 3 picks. But like, I think that 2 of them weren't his fault, and then one of them was, Their pass rush also isn't the best, on this team. And it's one of those things that it's like, if you can't get to these elite pass rushers in the postseason, they'll usually find a way to punish you. Strengths, I would say they do have a balanced defense. It's not like, their defense is bad or anything like that, but they've been gouged some games. The game that I think about that, was very eye-opening from many perspectives was against the Falcons when Kirk Cousins threw for 500. They just didn't look like they were playing defense in that game. And granted, that was one game and an outlier, but you have that kind of game in the playoffs and you're just doomed. They have a great O-line, Tristan Wirfs, Cody Mock, and, a few other guys that are very good O-line for Baker, and then great weapons. Mike Evans, obviously without Godwin, but they have great weapons. And I think, McMillan has really emerged as a very dependable guy. And, Bucky Irving, Rachaad White, they both did very well this year in a running attack that was subpar years before this. Moving on to the Baltimore Ravens, the weaknesses is, I would say, the defense consistency. They've obviously gotten a lot better as of late. I'd like to say that it's going to keep going that way in the playoffs, but they're only going to be playing the best of the best teams. Here their pass rush to me is good, but it's not great. And I'm not going to reiterate what I already said about what I think about pass rush and the necessity in the playoffs. Lack of offensive depth. I've heard that Zay Flowers is not playing. They obviously have Rashad Bateman, Derrick Henry, Isaiah Likely, and then I don't know why, Mark Andrews, but their offensive depth is kind of bad. I guess one thing that I just thought of is I don't know if Justice Hill is coming back at any point. He gave them kind of a spark in the receiving game, and found his own niche on the team. But without him, they've lacked that way. But Lamar Jackson has, performed. I wouldn't say overperformed because I think he's capable, but he's finally playing super, super well, to make up for that. Strengths, elite QB and wide receiver. We don't really need to talk about how King Henry, to me, is still the king of running backs, even after He turned 31 during the year this year, but he's a 250-pound guy who reached up to 21 miles per hour and above. The defensive talent, is very well rounded. They don't have anybody that's, really subpar, in my opinion, on the defense. And they all play very, very well as a unit. So it's the one thing that I think, they've got to feel good about, is that even with the inconsistencies, I think they've now put them to rest, hopefully. And we don't see any more of that defense that has given up a ton of yards. And their roster is very well rounded. I think it's important that teams know there's not going to be some easy, gimme sort of way to attack your roster in the playoffs to make it a gritty and grindy game, which is what Baltimore wants. Moving on to the Eagles, the weaknesses of this team to me are the passing attack. People seem to think that just because they have, just because they have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert's healthy, and, even Saquon has had some, plays in the passing attack. I just haven't seen it this year. And while Jalen Hurts had a very good completion percentage this year, he just didn't have the yardage that you'd think they'd have with all these weapons. And, that leads to my next thing, QB rustiness. Is he going to be rusty not having played in a game since the 22nd of December? Essentially it'll have been like 3 weeks, on game day, that since he had seen the field. And I just, people seem to think that it's just going to brush it under the rug. He's going to play fine and they're going to do what they're going to be able to do. But I think people are just kind of undervaluing like what the Packers run defense is like, and that they might have to actually pass to beat these guys. Key injuries. Like I said, to be honest with you, I will say this, it was hard for me to find like weaknesses that were very typical of this team, because they are a very good team. I'm not underselling that, but the league is also a league of attrition, and AJ Brown was dealing with a knee injury this week. And then you also look at Devonta Smith apparently had back spasms, which I know that from, prior guys with back spasms, you sometimes don't feel the same on game day, and you're not as, explosive and whatever else. So, and then of course Hurts his injury, his concussion. Is he going to come back and be as sharp as you would want him to be? But looking at the strengths of this team, obviously Saquon Barkley is one. I'd like to say, I maybe should have included Saquon in the O-line, because the O-line, deserves just as much credit as him. They were responsible for so many runs where he goes untouched or only has to fake out like one guy after being, second level, third level deep in that sort of thing. And then their defense is very well rounded. I think that they don't have a lot of gaps. I think that they do have talent. I do think their talent is obviously young and unproven in the playoffs, and that's always something to consider. I do think they have a very good defensive scheme, but otherwise, I think we kind of know what the Eagles are if you look at it, and it's like these are the obvious things that I thought about. Moving on to our final team, we have Buffalo. Their weaknesses, the defense. I understand they would like to play a lot of nickel, instead of base. But you look at it, and it's like some of these games, you look at when they played the Rams, when they played, the Lions, or when they played the Lions, granted they did very well against the Lions, early on, and then the Lions were playing catch up. But and they're obviously not your typical offense, being that, they're I believe the top in the league, but your defense is kind of the thing that I think could screw this team. and then penalties. They were actually, I think, maybe the highest penalized playoff team, actually, when I looked at it, but they had crazy penalties going against them. And it just seems to me like I have seen some games where they force Allen to play hero ball. And don't get me wrong, he's capable, but you don't want to have to force your star elite level potential MVP quarterback to have to do that. But looking at their strengths, obviously Josh Allen, I don't think I need to say much about him. Can do everything, is tough, is gritty, and does not relent. And then looking at their O-line is definitely a strength. They give Josh Allen a good amount of time, which is already dangerous enough that he's Josh Allen. And then to do that, they do a very good job. Playoff experience. They've obviously played against the Chiefs several times. I think that they've, come in and they understand, what it's like in the playoffs for most of their roster. And, we'll see if they look even better than they did in the hopes that they can finally go to the Super Bowl this year. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. I know that these last couple, I didn't talk about them as much because I feel like people know the better teams a lot better. Not to say that a lot of these teams aren't, the topper echelon of the league. I really think that, who we got in the playoffs, was who belonged this year. And it's going to be a hell of a show, and I think that, any of these games, barring a couple of teams with maybe too many injuries or too many issues that everyone's going to be able to compete. But if you guys like NFL content like this, I know this was a little bit longer of a video, and FYI, I will be doing one of these on the Chiefs and Lions for next week. I want to see who the Lions are getting back, who the Chiefs may even get back, because obviously those two teams have suffered a good amount of injuries, but still pulled out as the 1 seeds. But I definitely want to, cover them, and that will be next week. And, I will definitely post kind of a reaction video or my thoughts on, wild card weekend, come next Tuesday. But I want to thank you all for watching, and go Pack Go.